The life of a plant. The life of a plant. Foundations. Let us begin with the quiet story of how plants live their lives. Some plants, the annuals, complete everything in just one season. They germinate from tiny seeds, grow their stems and leaves, produce flowers, make new seeds, and then fade away, all within a few short months. Everything they're meant to do, accomplished in that brief window of time. Other plants, the perennials, take a different approach entirely. They return year after year, growing a little more, blooming again, persisting through seasons and years, building their presence slowly over time. Before a seed can begin its journey, it often requires very specific conditions. Some seeds need cold. They must experience winter's chill, a process called stratification, before they will germinate. Others have even more unusual requirements. They must pass through the digestive system of an animal, where acids and enzymes break down the seed coat just enough to allow water and oxygen to reach the embryo inside. Without these particular treatments, the seeds simply wait, dormant, and patient. In desert environments, some annual plants have evolved remarkable timing. When rain finally comes to these dry lands, often after months or even years, certain seeds germinate almost immediately. They grow quickly, flower rapidly, produce their seeds, and complete their entire existence in just a few weeks, before the water disappears again. Then their seeds settle into the soil, waiting for the next rain, which might not come for a very long time. This waiting is part of a larger strategy. Many plants maintain what is called a soil seed bank. Seeds lie dormant beneath the surface, sometimes for decades, held in a state of suspended animation. They wait there in the darkness, year after year, until conditions become just right. Only then do they germinate, emerging into the light after their long sleep in the earth. When a seed does finally germinate, the young plant must immediately orient itself. Roots need to grow downward, into the soil. Shoots need to grow upward, toward the light. Plants accomplish this through a clever mechanism involving gravity. Inside specialized cells, dense starch grains settle to the bottom, like tiny stones sinking in water. The plant senses where these grains have settled and uses that information to determine which way is down and which way is up, guiding its growth accordingly. As roots develop, they often spread much farther than you might expect. If you look at a tree and observe its canopy, the spread of its branches against the sky, you might assume the roots mirror that pattern below ground. But in many tree species, the roots extend far beyond the canopy, sometimes reaching 2 or 3 times the radius of the crown. Beneath the visible tree above the ground lies an even larger network below, spreading through the soil, seeking water and nutrients across a surprisingly wide area. The timing of root growth follows its own rhythm. In temperate regions, where seasons bring distinct changes, many trees begin growing new roots in early spring, even before their leaves emerge. The tree prioritizes this underground growth, establishing its water and nutrient uptake system first, preparing itself for the demands that will come when leaves unfurl and photosynthesis begins in earnest. As woody plants mature, they don't just grow taller, they also grow wider. A layer of cells called the vascular cambium sits just beneath the bark, dividing and producing new cells throughout the growing season. These cells form wood on the inside and bark on the outside, gradually increasing the girth of stems and roots, adding strength and capacity for transporting water and nutrients through the plant's body. This growth creates visible patterns. In many trees, each year's growth forms a distinct ring in the wood. You can count these rings to estimate how old a tree is. but they tell you more than just age. The width of each ring reflects the growing conditions that year. Wide rings indicate good growing seasons with adequate water. Narrow rings suggest drought or stress. Scientists study these rings to reconstruct climate conditions from decades or even centuries past, reading the tree's silent record of weather and seasons. The outer bark that covers a tree serves as its protection. It shields the living tissues beneath from fire, from insects, from extreme heat and cold. In regions where fires occur regularly, but burn with low intensity, many tree species have evolved particularly thick bark. This bark allows them to survive these fires, protecting the vital cambium layer beneath, ensuring the tree can continue growing even after flames have passed across the landscape. The bark stands as a quiet guardian, adapted through countless generations to the specific challenges of its environment. Capturing light and energy. Plants have developed different strategies for capturing carbon dioxide and converting light into energy, strategies shaped by the particular challenges of their environments. In hot, dry places, many cacti and succulents use what is called CAM photosynthesis. These plants do something unusual with their stomata, the tiny pores on their surfaces that allow gas exchange. Instead of opening these pores during the day, as most plants do, CAM plants open them mostly at night, when temperatures are cooler and the air is more humid. They take in carbon dioxide during these nighttime hours and store it, then use it for photosynthesis during the day while keeping their stomata closed, dramatically reducing water loss in their harsh, arid environments. Another adaptation exists in many plants that thrive in hot, sunny conditions. These plants use C4 photosynthesis, a process that concentrates carbon dioxide in specialized cells within their leaves. This concentration allows them to photosynthesize very efficiently, even when conditions are bright and hot, conditions that would cause other plants to struggle. Grasses in tropical savannas, corn in summer fields, many of these plants employ this C4 pathway, turning intense sunlight into growth. Beyond the chemistry of photosynthesis, some plants actively move to capture more light. This movement, called heliotropism, allows leaves or flowers to follow the sun across the sky. The plant tissues grow at different rates on different sides, bending the leaf or flower toward the light, tracking its movement from dawn to dusk, always positioning themselves to absorb as many photons as possible. Sunflowers demonstrate this solar tracking particularly clearly when they are young. Their flower heads move from east to west during the day, following the sun's path across the sky. At night, they slowly turn back to face east again, ready for sunrise. This daily dance continues through their youth, maximizing their light capture during the crucial growing period. As they mature, they eventually stop moving and face predominantly eastward, warming up more quickly in the morning sun. Even the way leaves are arranged on a stem matters for light capture. This arrangement, called phyllotaxy, follows particular patterns. Some plants arrange their leaves alternately, one leaf per node, spiraling up the stem. Others have opposite leaves, 2 leaves per node, positioned across from each other. Still others have whorled arrangements, with 3 or more leaves radiating from a single point. Each pattern represents a different solution to the problem of positioning leaves so they can gather light without shading each other too much. In many plants, these leaf arrangements form spiral patterns that mathematically approximate the Fibonacci sequence, those numbers where each value is the sum of the 2 before it. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. This arrangement, found throughout nature, helps optimize each leaf's exposure to light while minimizing how much it shades the leaves below. The spirals create efficient packing, allowing many leaves to coexist on a single stem, each angled to catch its share of sunlight. The same plant can produce very different leaves depending on where they grow and how much light reaches it. Leaves that develop in deep shade often grow larger and thinner than leaves on the same species growing in full sun. These shade leaves spread out their surface area, trying to capture as much of the limited light as possible, with a thinner structure that requires less energy to build and maintain. Sun leaves, by contrast, tend to be thicker and more compact. Inside these leaves, the palisade layer, where much of photosynthesis occurs, is more developed, packed with chloroplasts ready to process the abundant light. These structural differences allow the leaf to handle intense sunlight efficiently, converting those bright photons into chemical energy without being damaged by the intensity. Different plant species have evolved different tolerances for shade. Some plants, the shade-tolerant ones, can maintain positive photosynthesis even when light levels drop very low. They grow slowly in these dim conditions, but they can survive and even thrive where other plants cannot. Shade-intolerant species, meanwhile, require much more light to maintain a positive carbon balance. They photosynthesize rapidly in bright conditions, but struggle or die in deep shade. Their strategies optimized for different positions in the forest, different moments in ecological succession, different places in the endless variation of light and shadow that defines the plant world. Water, scarcity, and abundance. Water shapes how plants live just as much as light does. In places where water is scarce, plants have evolved remarkable ways to store it. Succulent plants thicken their leaves or stems into reservoirs, filling their tissues with water-storing cells. Cacti and aloe plants can survive for months without rain, drawing on these internal reserves, their swollen tissues slowly releasing moisture to keep the plant alive through long, dry periods. Some trees take this storage strategy to an extraordinary scale. Baobabs, those massive trees of African savannas, store enormous amounts of water in their swollen trunks. The trunk itself becomes a reservoir, sometimes holding thousands of liters. During the dry season, when other plants struggle, baobabs can draw on this stored water to produce leaves and flowers, maintaining their life processes even when the soil around them has turned to dust. Other desert plants reach deep instead of storing water above ground. Many desert shrubs send down taproots that extend far below the surface, sometimes reaching 10, 20, even 30 meters down into the earth. These roots tap into underground water reserves that remain even when the surface is completely dry, allowing the plant to access moisture that lies far beneath the parched landscape above. Reducing water loss is just as important as finding water. Many desert plants have evolved small, narrow, or highly reduced leaves. Some have no conventional leaves at all. Instead, their green stems take over the work of photosynthesis, presenting a smaller surface area to the hot, dry air. This reduction minimizes the amount of water that can evaporate from the plant's surface, while still allowing it to capture sunlight and produce energy. A few plants have developed perhaps the most extreme adaptation to water scarcity. These resurrection plants can survive nearly complete desiccation. They dry out so thoroughly that they appear dead, their tissues shriveled and brown. But when water finally returns, they revive, sometimes within hours, their cells rehydrating and their metabolism restarting as if they had never stopped. They exist in a state between life and death, waiting, preserved, until moisture returns. Every plant must balance two competing needs, taking in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis and preventing water from escaping. The cuticle, that waxy layer covering leaves, varies in thickness. Some plants have thin cuticles, others thick, waterproof coatings. The number and arrangement of stomata also varies. More stomata mean more gas exchange, but also more potential water loss. Fewer stomata conserve water, but limit photosynthesis. Each species has evolved its own balance, suited to its particular environment. The placement of stomata matters too. In many plants, most stomata are located on the underside of leaves rather than the upper surface. This positioning protects them somewhat from direct sunlight and air currents, both of which increase evaporation. The lower surface tends to be cooler and more humid, reducing the rate at which water escapes through these necessary openings. Plants can also respond dynamically to drought. When certain plants sense water stress, they close their stomata rapidly, sometimes within minutes. This emergency response conserves whatever water remains inside the plant, shutting down photosynthesis temporarily to prevent potentially fatal water loss. The plant waits, stomata closed, until conditions improve. At the other end of the spectrum, in places where water is abundant rather than scarce, plants face different challenges. Aquatic plants often develop leaves and stems filled with large internal air spaces. These spaces make the tissues buoyant, allowing them to float, keeping their photosynthetic surfaces near the water's surface, where light is brightest. The air spaces act like flotation devices, holding the plant in the optimal position for capturing sunlight through the water. Many wetland plants have hollow stems serving a different purpose. Their roots sit in waterlogged soil or submerged entirely, environments where oxygen is scarce. The hollow stems create channels that transport oxygen from the air down to these submerged roots, allowing them to respire even underwater. The stem becomes a snorkel of sorts, connecting the roots to the atmosphere above, solving the problem of breathing in an environment where oxygen is dissolved rather than freely available, where water is everywhere but air is nowhere to be found. Extreme habitats. Plants live not only in deserts and wetlands, but in some of the harshest environments on Earth. High in the mountains, where cold winds blow constantly and temperatures plummet, alpine plants have adapted by growing low and compact. They form cushion-like shapes, hugging the ground, presenting as little surface area as possible to the wind. This low profile reduces heat loss and offers protection from the fierce winds that sweep across high elevations. The cushion shape also traps heat near the ground, creating a slightly warmer microclimate within the plant itself. Many alpine plants add another layer of protection through dense coverings of hair. These fine hairs blanket the leaves and stems, creating a fuzzy coating that traps a layer of still air close to the plant's surface. This boundary layer of trapped air acts as insulation, reducing heat loss and protecting the plant from the extreme cold of high-altitude environments. The hairs create a buffer between the living tissues and the harsh world outside. In coastal zones where fresh water meets salt water, mangrove trees face the challenge of living in brackish conditions. Salt at high concentrations is toxic to most plants, but mangroves have evolved specialized root systems and internal mechanisms to handle it. Some exclude salt at the roots, filtering it out before it enters the plant. Others allow salt in, but then excrete it through their leaves, or store it in specific tissues. These adaptations allow mangroves to thrive where other trees cannot survive, standing with their roots in salty water, bridging the boundary between land and sea. Other coastal plants deal with salt in different ways. Many have thick, waxy coatings on their leaves and well-developed cuticles that reduce water loss and provide protection from salt spray carried on ocean winds. The salt-laden mist that drifts inland can damage unprotected tissues, but these waxy surfaces shed the spray, preventing salt from penetrating into the leaf and causing harm. In salt marshes, where plants are regularly flooded with brackish water, some species have evolved specialized salt glands. These glands actively excrete excess salt, pushing it out through the leaf surface where it crystallizes and eventually washes away. Other salt marsh plants store salt in older leaves, then shed those leaves, effectively removing the accumulated salt from the plant. The fallen leaves carry the salt away, allowing the plant to maintain safe salt levels in its living tissues. Fire presents another environmental extreme. Some conifers and other plant species have evolved to not just survive fire, but to use it. They produce serotinous cones or seeds, structures that remain closed and protected until exposed to the heat of fire. The fire triggers these cones to open or stimulates seeds to germinate, allowing the plant to colonize the newly cleared landscape after the flames have passed. Fire becomes part of the plant's reproductive strategy, a disaster transformed into opportunity. In bogs and peatlands, conditions create a different kind of extreme environment. These waterlogged areas have very low oxygen levels, which dramatically slows decomposition. When plants die in these environments, they don't rot away quickly as they would in other places. Instead, the plant material accumulates, building up layer upon layer over centuries and millennia. This accumulated organic matter forms peat, a dense material made largely of compressed plant remains. These peatlands represent significant carbon stores on a global scale. Plant material accumulates faster than it breaks down in the waterlogged, oxygen-poor conditions. Carbon that the plants captured from the atmosphere through photosynthesis becomes locked away in the peat, removed from the carbon cycle for potentially thousands of years. The peat grows deeper over time, building up slowly, silently storing carbon in these quiet, wet landscapes where decomposition has almost stopped, where the normal processes of decay have been suspended by water and the absence of oxygen, creating archives of ancient plants. Underground alliance layers plants do not live in isolation. Below ground, invisible to our eyes, they form partnerships with other organisms, relationships that have shaped life on land for hundreds of millions of years. Many legumes, plants like peas, beans, and clover, host specialized bacteria in small structures called root nodules. These bacteria possess a remarkable ability. They can take nitrogen gas from the air in the soil and convert it into forms that plants can use. Nitrogen is essential for making proteins and other vital molecules, but most plants cannot access the abundant nitrogen in the atmosphere. The bacteria do this work for them, and in return, the plant provides the bacteria with sugars and a protected place to live. It is a trade, an exchange that benefits both partners. This nitrogen-fixing partnership is not limited to legumes alone. Some non-legume plant families have also evolved similar associations, though with different bacterial partners. Alder trees, for instance, host bacteria in their roots that fix nitrogen, allowing these trees to colonize poor soils where other species struggle. The strategy appears again and again across the plant kingdom. Different lineages independently discovering the value of partnering with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. An even more widespread partnership involves fungi. Many plant roots form symbiotic associations with fungi, creating structures called mycorrhizae. The fungal threads, much finer than roots, extend through the soil like an invisible network, reaching into tiny pore spaces that roots cannot penetrate. These fungal partners improve the plant's ability to absorb water and nutrients, particularly phosphorus, which moves slowly through soil. The fungi receive sugars from the plant in exchange, sugars produced through photosynthesis. Again, it is a partnership, an exchange of resources between two very different forms of life. These mycorrhizal fungi do something even more remarkable. A single fungal network can connect to multiple plants, sometimes plants of different species. The fungi form living bridges between individuals, and through these connections, nutrients can potentially transfer from one plant to another. A tree in bright sunlight, producing abundant sugars, might share some with a smaller tree in its shade through their common fungal partner. The implications of this sharing are still being studied and understood. Scientists have begun calling these fungal networks the Wood Wide Web, a vast underground internet of sorts connecting trees and other plants across the forest. Through these networks, plants exchange not only nutrients, but also chemical signals. A tree under attack by insects might send warning signals through the fungal network, prompting neighboring trees to boost their chemical defenses before the insects reach them. The forest becomes less a collection of individuals and more a community, connected and communicating beneath the soil. Plants also actively shape the microbial communities around their roots. They release root exudates, chemical compounds that seep from root tips into the surrounding soil. These exudates are not random. Different compounds selectively encourage beneficial microbes, providing them with food and creating conditions where they thrive. At the same time, other compounds in the exudates discourage pathogens, making the area around the root less hospitable to harmful organisms. The plant engineers its own underground environment, cultivating helpful partnerships while defending against threats, managing an invisible garden of microbes in the soil around its roots, creating a zone where beneficial relationships flourish and harmful ones are suppressed, all through chemistry released quietly into the earth. Plant intelligence, defense, and warfare. Plants cannot run from danger. They cannot hide. Yet they are far from defenseless. Over countless generations, they have evolved sophisticated chemical defenses, producing an enormous variety of compounds collectively called secondary metabolites. Alkaloids, terpenes, phenolic compounds, thousands of different molecules that serve no direct role in basic plant metabolism, but instead protect the plant. Some of these chemicals taste bitter, discouraging herbivores from feeding. Others are toxic, poisoning insects or mammals that try to eat the leaves. Still others help defend against fungal or bacterial pathogens, or protect the plant from environmental stresses like intense ultraviolet radiation. These defenses are not always static. Many plants respond to damage by increasing their production of defensive chemicals. When an insect begins chewing on a leaf, the plant detects the damage and ramps up its chemical defenses, making the remaining leaves less palatable or more toxic. Future attacks become less successful. The plant learns, in a sense, from the first assault, adjusting its chemistry to better resist what follows. Some plants take this response even further. When attacked by herbivores, they release volatile chemicals into the air, compounds that drift away on the wind. These airborne signals can attract predators or parasites of the herbivores, summoning help. A caterpillar chewing on a leaf might trigger the plant to release chemicals that attract wasps that prey on caterpillars. The plant calls for allies. These same volatile compounds can also serve as warnings to neighboring plants, which detect the chemicals and begin ramping up their own defenses before they are attacked, preparing for danger that has not yet arrived. Plants respond to their environment in ways that might seem almost animal-like. They generate electrical signals, pulses of voltage, that travel through their tissues, much like nerve impulses in animals, though much more slowly. These electrical signals help coordinate responses across different parts of the plant. A stimulus in one location, like damage or touch, can trigger electrical signals that spread through the plant, activating defenses or other responses far from the original disturbance. Plants even respond to physical forces. Mechanical stress from wind or repeated touch causes many plants to alter their growth patterns, growing shorter and sturdier rather than tall and thin. This phenomenon, sometimes called thigmomorphogenesis, represents an adaptation to mechanical disturbance. A tree growing in a windy location develops a stronger, thicker trunk, than the same species growing in a sheltered spot. The constant buffeting shapes the plant's form, producing a structure better able to withstand the forces it regularly experiences. The sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica, demonstrates perhaps the most dramatic response to touch. When its leaves are touched, the leaflets rapidly fold together, and the entire leaf droops downward, all within seconds. This happens through rapid changes in turgor pressure within specialized motor cells at the base of each leaflet and leaf. Water rushes out of these cells, they lose their rigidity, and the leaf collapses. Minutes later, pressure gradually rebuilds, and the leaf slowly reopens. The purpose of this response might be to startle herbivores, or to make the plant look wilted and less appealing, or simply to dislodge insects that have landed on the leaves. Plants also compete with each other chemically. Some species release allelopathic chemicals from their roots into the surrounding soil. These compounds inhibit the germination of seeds or slow the growth of other plants nearby. Black walnut trees, for instance, release a chemical called juglone that prevents many other plant species from growing beneath their canopy. The tree creates a zone around itself where competition is reduced, where fewer plants can successfully establish themselves, giving the walnut a competitive advantage by poisoning the soil for others. It is chemical warfare, slow and silent, waged through roots in the darkness beneath the ground, shaping which plants can grow where, determining the composition of plant communities through molecules released into the earth. Flowers, pollinators, and deception. Flowering represents one of the most important moments in a plant's life, the moment when reproduction becomes possible. Timing matters enormously. Numerous plants use photoperiodism, the ability to sense day length and temperature, to determine when to flower. They measure the hours of darkness, detecting the subtle changes as seasons shift. This allows them to time their flowering so that pollinators are active and environmental conditions are favorable. Spring flowers bloom when their pollinators emerge. Summer flowers wait for longer, warmer days. Each species has its own timing, its own response to the changing length of days and nights. Not all plants rely on showy flowers to attract pollinators. Wind-pollinated plants, including many grasses and conifers, take a different approach entirely. Their flowers are often small and inconspicuous, lacking the bright colors and sweet scents that attract insects. Instead, these plants produce enormous amounts of lightweight pollen that drifts on air currents. The strategy relies on quantity over precision, releasing clouds of pollen in the hope that some will randomly land on the flowers of another plant of the same species. For plants that do attract animal pollinators, flowers become advertisements, signals designed to catch attention. Many flowers display ultraviolet patterns on their petals, patterns completely invisible to human eyes, but clearly visible to bees and other insects, which can see into the ultraviolet range. These patterns act as nectar guides, like runway lights directing pollinators toward the center of the flower, where nectar and pollen await. The flower speaks in a visual language we cannot perceive. Some flowers change their signals after pollination occurs. Once a flower has been pollinated, it no longer needs to attract pollinators, and continuing to do so would waste the pollinator's time and the flower's resources. In certain species, flowers change color after being pollinated, shifting from one hue to another. This color change signals to pollinators that these particular blooms no longer offer rewards, directing the pollinators toward unpollinated flowers instead, making the whole system more efficient. The night brings different pollinators with different needs. Some species produce flowers that open only after dark, flowers pollinated by moths or bats rather than daytime insects. These night-blooming flowers often rely heavily on scent rather than visual signals. releasing strong fragrances that drift through the darkness, guiding pollinators to them. The scents can be sweet, or musky, or complex, each tuned to attract the particular creatures that fly through that plant's nighttime world. Night-blooming plants often have pale or white flowers, colors that stand out in low-light conditions. While bright reds and purples might be striking in sunlight, they disappear into darkness. White and pale yellow remain visible even under moonlight or starlight, easier for nocturnal pollinators to locate as they navigate through the night. Some flowers engage in elaborate deception. Certain orchids produce flowers that mimic the appearance and scent of female insects with remarkable precision. Male insects, encountering what they believe to be a potential mate, attempt to copulate with the flower. In the process, they pick up pollen or deposit pollen they are already carrying, pollinating the orchid. The male insect receives nothing, deceived completely, while the orchid achieves pollination through this sexual mimicry. Partnerships between plants and pollinators can become extraordinarily specific. In many species of figs, each fig tree species depends on its own specialized fig wasp for pollination. The wasp enters the enclosed flower cluster inside the developing fig, pollinates the flowers, and lays its eggs there. The wasp larvae develop inside, feeding on some of the seeds. When they mature, they mate, and the females leave carrying pollen to find another fig of the same species. Neither partner can complete its life cycle without the other. The mutualism is absolute, refined over millions of years into perfect interdependence. Not all flowers aim to please. The giant parasitic plant Rafflesia arnoldii produces one of the largest individual flowers in the world, measuring over a meter across. But this enormous flower produces no nectar. Instead, it emits an odor resembling rotting meat, a stench that attracts carrion flies. The flies, fooled into thinking they have found decomposing flesh suitable for laying eggs, land on the flower and pollinate it, drawn not by beauty or sweetness, but by the promise of death and decay, a strategy as effective as it is repulsive to human senses. Seeds, sex, and survival strategies. After flowers are pollinated and seeds develop, the next challenge begins. Seeds must disperse, must travel away from the parent plant to find new ground where they can germinate and grow. Many seeds have evolved structures specifically for hitchhiking on animals. Hooks, barbs, sticky coatings, all adaptations that allow seeds to attach to fur, or feathers, or clothing. The animal moves through the landscape, and the seeds come along, dropping off eventually in some new location, sometimes kilometers from where they began. The animal becomes an unwitting partner in dispersal, carrying the next generation to new territories. Water offers another pathway for dispersal. Some seeds are structured to float, able to drift on rivers or even ocean currents. These water-dispersed seeds can remain viable for remarkably long periods, floating for weeks or months before finally washing ashore somewhere distant. Coconuts can cross oceans this way, establishing themselves on remote islands, carried by currents across vast expanses of water, waiting patiently until they reach land. Not all reproduction requires the meeting of pollen and egg. Some plants, certain dandelions among them, can reproduce through apomixis, forming seeds without fertilization. The offspring produced this way are nearly genetically identical to the parent, clones created through seed. This allows rapid reproduction without the need for pollinators or mates, though it sacrifices the genetic diversity that sexual reproduction provides. Clonal reproduction can also occur vegetatively, through roots or underground stems. Aspen trees demonstrate this dramatically. What appears to be a forest of many individual trees may actually be a single organism, all the trunks genetically identical and connected by a shared root system. One of these clonal colonies, called Pando, covers more than 40 hectares and may weigh nearly 6,000 metric tons, making it potentially one of the largest and oldest living organisms on Earth, though it appears as a grove of separate trees. Some plants employ a strategy called massed seeding, synchronizing their reproduction across entire populations. In certain years, massed years, trees produce enormous numbers of seeds. In other years, they produce very few. This irregular pattern serves a purpose. Seed predators like rodents and birds maintain their populations based on average seed availability. When a massed year occurs, the sheer abundance of seeds overwhelms the predators. They cannot possibly eat them all. Many seeds survive simply because there are too many to consume. Then, in the lean years that follow, predator populations decline due to lack of food, and the cycle begins again. The mechanics of reproduction vary enormously among plant species. Some plants are obligate self-incompatible, possessing genetic systems that prevent them from fertilizing themselves. They must receive pollen from another individual of the same species. This enforces outcrossing, maintaining genetic diversity, but requiring that compatible mates be available. Other plants are self-compatible, capable of pollinating themselves. This proves useful when pollinators are rare, or when individuals are isolated. A single plant can reproduce alone, ensuring that seeds are produced even in the absence of others. Self-compatibility sacrifices some genetic diversity for reliability of reproduction. Many species have evolved physical mechanisms to reduce self-pollination even when it is possible. Some produce separate male and female flowers on the same plant. Others time their reproduction so that pollen is released before or after the flowers on the same plant are receptive. These mechanisms encourage cross-pollination, while still allowing self-pollination as a backup strategy if necessary. In dioecious species, individuals are either entirely male or entirely female. A male plant produces only pollen. A female plant produces only seeds. Cross-pollination between separate plants becomes obligatory. This system guarantees genetic mixing, but requires that both male and female plants exist in the same area, that pollen can travel between them. Some plant species possess even more flexibility. They can switch sex, or adjust their investment in male versus female flowers depending on environmental conditions. A plant in favorable conditions, with abundant resources, might produce more female flowers, investing in the resource-intensive process of seed production. A plant under stress might produce more male flowers, which require less investment. Some species can change sex entirely from one year to the next, responding to their circumstances, adjusting their reproductive strategy to match the resources available, the opportunities present, the demands of survival in an ever-changing world. Opportunities present, forests, the demands of survival in an ever-changing world. Plant communities develop structure over time, organizing themselves into layers that stack vertically through space. In forests, a canopy layer stretches overhead, where the tallest trees spread their crowns. Below this, an understory of smaller trees grows in the filtered light. Beneath them, a shrub layer develops, and lower still, herbs and grasses carpet the ground. Each layer provides different conditions, different amounts of light, different levels of humidity and temperature, creating distinct habitats within a single forest. A vertical arrangement of environments. Not all plants grow upward from the ground on their own support. Climbing plants, species like ivy, grapevine, and morning glory, use various strategies to ascend. Some twine their stems around other plants or structures, spiraling upward. Others produce tendrils, specialized structures that coil around whatever they touch, anchoring the plant and pulling it higher. Still others, like ivy, develop adhesive roots that cling directly to bark or stone, allowing them to climb vertical surfaces toward brighter light higher in the canopy without investing energy in building thick, self-supporting trunks. In tropical forests, lianas take climbing to another level. These woody vines can be as thick as a person's arm or thicker, their stems reaching from the forest floor all the way to the canopy, dozens of meters above. They rely completely on trees for structural support, their own tissues devoted to length rather than girth. A liana can reach the bright canopy without the enormous investment required to build a thick trunk capable of standing on its own. Some tropical trees produce flowers and fruits in unusual locations. Rather than bearing them at the tips of branches, cauliflorous trees produce flowers and fruits directly on their trunks or large branches. This adaptation makes the fruits more accessible to large animals like monkeys or bats that move along tree trunks, animals that might not venture out onto smaller branches. The tree positions its reproductive structures where its particular pollinators and seed dispersers can most easily reach them. Other plants dispense with ground contact entirely. Epiphytes, plants like many orchids and bromeliads, grow on other plants for support but take nothing from their host's tissues. They are not parasites. They absorb water and nutrients directly from rain and from the air, from dust and organic debris that accumulates around their roots. They live high in the canopy, perched on branches, accessing the bright light available there without competing for space on the crowded forest floor below. Many epiphytic orchids and bromeliads have evolved specialized structures. Their leaves form rosettes or cups that trap rainwater and fallen debris, creating tiny pools high in the trees. These water-filled tanks become miniature ecosystems, supporting insects, tree frogs, and other small organisms. The decomposing organic matter in these tanks provides nutrients for the plant, and the animals living there contribute waste that further enriches the water. Entire communities exist in these elevated ponds, small worlds held in the embrace of leaves. On the forest floor, dense vegetation in the understory can create challenges for new growth. Thick layers of shrubs and herbs compete intensely for the limited light that filters down through the canopy. Tree seedlings struggle to establish themselves in these conditions, shaded not only from above, but also from the sides, surrounded by competitors. The understory becomes a barrier that only the most shade-tolerant or the most fortunate seedlings can overcome. When disturbance creates openings, when a tree falls or fire clears an area, pioneer plants arrive first. These species grow rapidly, colonizing the bare ground quickly. They often have light seeds that travel far on wind or water. They tolerate harsh conditions, full sun, and exposed soil. As they grow, they improve conditions for other species, adding organic matter to the soil, creating shade, reducing temperature extremes. They prepare the site for later successional species, plants that grow more slowly but eventually overtop and replace the pioneers. A single large tree can itself constitute a community. A mature oak tree might support hundreds of different species. Insects feed on its leaves, bore into its wood, sip sap from its bark. Fungi decompose its fallen leaves and form mycorrhizal associations with its roots. Lichens coat its branches. Birds nest in its cavities. Mammals den in hollows in its trunk. The tree provides food, shelter, and structure for countless organisms, a living architecture that supports an entire web of interactions. At the largest scale, entire regions become defined by their plant life. The Amazon rainforest, often called Earth's green lung, contains an enormous share of global plant biodiversity. Tens of thousands of plant species grow there, in a space that covers less than 2% of Earth's surface. More species of trees exist in a single hectare of Amazon rainforest than in all of North America. The diversity staggers comprehension, the result of millions of years of evolution in a stable, warm, wet environment where plants have diversified into every conceivable niche, filling the forest with an abundance of life that we are only beginning to understand. At the largest scale, entire regions become defined by their plant life. The Amazon rainforest, often called Earth's green lung, contains an enormous share of global plant biodiversity. Tens of thousands of plant species grow there, in a space that covers less than 2% of Earth's surface. More species of trees exist in a single hectare of Amazon rainforest than in all of North America. The diversity staggers comprehension, the result of millions of years of evolution in a stable, warm, wet environment where plants have diversified into every conceivable niche, filling the forest with an abundance of life that we are only beginning to understand. Humans and plants. Humans have shaped plants, and plants have shaped humans, a relationship extending back thousands of years. Many of our staple crops, the foods that feed billions, are grasses. Wheat, maize, rice, all members of the grass family. These plants, once wild and producing small seeds, have been transformed through generations of selection into the high-yielding crops that form the foundation of human nutrition. The grass family, so humble in appearance, proves enormously important to human survival. Behind our cultivated crops lie their wild relatives, plants still growing in forests and grasslands and mountainsides around the world. These wild species serve as crucial genetic reservoirs. They contain genes for disease resistance, for drought tolerance, for adaptation to different soils and climates. When a new disease threatens wheat fields, or when climate change alters growing conditions, plant breeders can sometimes find solutions in wild relatives, crossing them with domestic varieties to introduce beneficial traits that have been lost during domestication. Horticulturists have developed techniques to manipulate plants in ways that nature alone would not achieve. Grafting allows them to join tissues from different plants, taking a cutting from one variety or even one species and physically attaching it to the rootstock of another. The tissues grow together, fusing, and the result is a single plant with characteristics from both parents. The roots of one support the shoots of another, combining their traits in a living chimera. This grafting proves particularly useful in fruit trees. Rootstocks can be chosen to impart specific traits. A dwarfing rootstock keeps the tree small, making fruit easier to harvest. A disease-resistant rootstock protects the whole tree from soil-borne pathogens. A rootstock adapted to alkaline soils allows varieties that would otherwise struggle to grow in those conditions. The fruit and foliage come from the grafted variety, but the roots shape how the tree grows and where it can thrive. Ornamental plants have been transformed through selective breeding, generation after generation chosen for specific aesthetic traits. Double flowers, where extra petals replace reproductive structures, exist because humans found them beautiful and saved seeds from plants that produced them. Unusual colors, extended blooming periods, compact growth forms, all results of deliberate selection. These plants have been shaped by human preference, their evolution guided by our sense of beauty rather than by natural selection alone. Some ornamental traits come at a cost. Variegated plants, with their striking patterns of white or yellow on green leaves, achieve these patterns through regions of reduced or absent chlorophyll. The pale areas cannot photosynthesize efficiently. The plant produces less energy than a fully green plant would. It grows more slowly, requires more careful cultivation. The beauty humans prize reduces the plant's fundamental ability to feed itself, a trade-off acceptable in gardens, but one that would prove disadvantageous in the wild. Modern plant propagation employs techniques that would have seemed miraculous to earlier generations. In tissue culture, tiny pieces of plant tissue, sometimes just a few cells, are placed on sterile nutrient media in laboratory conditions. These fragments of tissue grow, dividing and multiplying, eventually forming complete plants. Hundreds or thousands of genetically identical individuals can be produced from a single original plant. Mass-producing exact copies with precision no traditional propagation method could match. Sometimes, however, the tissue culture process introduces unexpected changes. Somoclonal variation, genetic variation that arises during tissue culture, can create plants that differ from the parent. Usually these variations are neutral or harmful. Occasionally, though, they produce novel traits that prove valuable. A new color, increased disease resistance, altered growth form. These spontaneous variations add an element of unpredictability to tissue culture, offering the possibility of discovering something new, something that did not exist before. Emerging from the artificial conditions of the laboratory, mutations and changes occurring as cells divide in glass containers under lights, creating variation that breeders can then select and propagate, continuing the ancient partnership between humans and plants into new territory. Plants in culture, medicine, and flavor. Plants have given humanity far more than food and oxygen. They have provided medicines that have saved countless lives. Willows and related plants contain salicylate compounds in their bark and leaves. For centuries, people chewed willow bark to relieve pain and reduce fever, long before they understood why it worked. Eventually, scientists isolated and modified these salicylate compounds, leading to the development of aspirin and other modern medicines. A molecule first produced by a tree to defend against pathogens became one of the most widely used drugs in human history. Many of the flavors we associate with cooking come directly from plant chemistry. Herbs like basil, mint, and rosemary derive their characteristic tastes and aromas from essential oils. These oils are stored in tiny glandular hairs on the leaf surfaces, concentrated pockets of volatile compounds. When you crush a mint leaf between your fingers, you rupture these glands, releasing the oils and their distinctive scent. The flavors we prize in our cooking are defense chemicals, compounds the plants evolved to deter herbivores, repurposed by humans to enhance our food. Some plant-derived products are so labor-intensive to produce that they become extraordinarily valuable. Saffron, one of the world's most expensive spices, consists of the dried stigmas of the Crocus sativus. Each flower produces only 3 stigmas, and they must be harvested by hand during a brief flowering period. Thousands of flowers are needed to produce a single ounce of saffron, accounting for its remarkable price. The warm, golden color and subtle flavor come from those tiny threads, carefully plucked and dried. Vanilla, another costly flavoring, comes from the cured seed pods of an orchid, typically Vanilla planifolia. In its native range, specific bees pollinate vanilla orchids, but in most places where vanilla is grown commercially, the flowers must be pollinated by hand, flower by flower. After pollination, the pods develop over months, then must be carefully cured through a lengthy process of heating and drying that develops the characteristic vanilla flavor. The complex, sweet taste requires enormous labor to produce. Chocolate begins its journey in tropical forests, where cacao trees grow. These trees produce flowers directly on their trunks and large branches, small blooms pollinated by tiny midges, flies barely visible to the human eye. From these pollinated flowers develop the cacao pods, inside which lie the seeds. These seeds, fermented and roasted, become the cacao beans from which chocolate is made. The rich, complex flavor that humans crave depends on midges pollinating flowers on tree trunks in humid forests. Coffee, the beverage that wakes much of the world each morning, comes from the seeds of coffea shrubs. These seeds, which we call coffee beans though they are not true beans, develop inside bright red or yellow fruits. The flavor of the coffee varies dramatically depending on where the plants grow. Altitude, soil composition, rainfall, temperature, all influence the chemistry that develops in the seeds. The processing methods, how the fruits are handled and the seeds dried and roasted, further shape the final taste. Each cup of coffee represents a specific place, a particular combination of plant, environment, and human cultivation. The plants around us, often unnoticed, provide the material foundation of human civilization. They produce the oxygen we breathe with every inhalation. They create the food that fuels our bodies. They offer medicines that heal our ailments and flavors that bring pleasure to our meals. They shape landscapes and create the conditions for countless other species to exist. They have been here far longer than we have, and they will likely remain long after we are gone, quietly photosynthesizing, growing, adapting, reproducing, living their patient, rooted lives. From ancient forests to your morning cup of coffee, plants quietly run the world.